This series will ask questions and investigate why the North American liberals/Democrats are obsessed with death.
Today's Democratic Party believes that government has an important role to play in society. It fights against economic inequality. It advocates policies that battle racial and gender discrimination. But it wasn't always this way. The Democratic Party was once the party of white supremacy, supporting slavery and the Ku Klux Klan. To understand how the party made such a huge shift, you have to go back to its origins in the mid-1820s, when it sprung up supporting the presidential candidacy of a popular former general, Andrew Jackson. Jackson was an outsider, challenging the political establishment and the elites of his day, and his critics disparaged him as a jackass. But Jackson embraced the animal as a symbol of determination, and donkeys started appearing in newspapers to represent him and his followers. In the 1828 presidential election, which saw record-breaking popular participation, Jackson won in a landslide victory. So his supporters argued that they, and not the old elites, represented the popular will of the country, and they started calling themselves the Democratic Party. Jackson's administration immediately began expelling Native Americans living east of the Mississippi River, an issue that defined the new administration. After he signed the Indian Removal Act into law in 1830, 5 large tribes were rounded up and forcibly marched into territories and camps further west. And the Democrats' ambitions didn't stop there. In the 1840s, the party adopted the doctrine of manifest destiny, the idea that Americans, white Americans, were divinely entitled to dominate the whole North American continent. Democratic President James K. Polk put this idea into action, massively expanding U.S. holdings by annexing Texas, acquiring Oregon, and winning much of what's now the southwestern U.S. in a war with Mexico. But soon afterward, national politics devolved into bitter controversy over whether new states entering the Union should be permitted to allow slavery. Democrats said they should, since their support base was strongest in slaveholding states. Yet a new Northern party, the Republicans, sprang up in opposition to expanding slavery any further. When Republican Abraham Lincoln won the presidency, the South seceded and the Civil War began.
Lincoln had always said that if slavery isn't wrong, then nothing is wrong. That slavery was horrendous.
And I think it was because he hated the way his father had treated him, which was like a slave. Because his father would yank him out of school, force him to go work on neighbors' farms, performing all kinds of backbreaking labor.
There is no reason why the Negro is not entitled to all the rights enumerated in the Declaration of Independence.
When Lincoln invokes the Declaration of Independence here, there's no quarreling, there's no quibbling with it. That is the authority.
He is as much entitled to these rights as the white man.
Lining the Declaration of Independence up on his side provides a formidable obstacle for Stephen Douglas to scramble over.
He is my equal, and the equal of Judge Douglas.
Lincoln argues that if slavery is allowed to spread into the new territories, it will lead to war.
I'd been speaking on many campuses, and typically when I would talk about slavery, I'd make the point that the secession debate was between the North and the South, but the slavery debate was between a pro-slavery Democratic Party and an anti-slavery Republican Party. In other words, the Democrats of the North were equally complicit as the Democrats of the South in protecting slavery as an institution. That's the key point. Inevitably, some pompous professor would stand up and say, well, Dinesh, your comments, although true in and of themselves, are a wee bit simplistic. You have to realize that there's plenty of blame to go around. We can't simply fault one party or the other party. Both parties were, you might say, accessories to the historical crime, etc., etc., etc. And whenever I hear this, this to me is the proverbial squid-like cloud of rhetoric that it's very important to dissipate because it's actually intended to muddy the waters, not to clarify things. And so in Hillary's America, I decided, let me push the envelope and make a categorical scientific statement, scientific in the sense that it's eminently refutable. And so I did. In 1860, the year before the Civil War, I said, no Republican owned a slave. Not no Republican leader owned a slave, but no Republican in the United States owned a slave. All the slaves in the entire country, 4 million of them, were owned by Democrats. Now, this statement, I want to tell you, appears in no history book, no textbook. It has never appeared to my knowledge in an article. It has never been uttered by anyone on television or on the History Channel or in a documentary. And yet, as I say, it's eminently refutable. All you have to do is give me the names of 5 Republicans who owned slaves, and I would have to take it back. But to this day and to this moment, not a single counterexample has ever been provided. Not one. One PhD researcher wrote me several months ago, and he said, I got you, Dinesh, I got you. Ulysses S. Grant inherited a slave on his wife's side, a solitary slave. And I pointed out to him, I said, that was almost a touche, my friend, but you've got to remember that at the time this happened, Ulysses S. Grant was a Democrat. Only later did he move over into the Republican column. Now, I mention this because this is actually history. It's indisputable, it's in the record. Professor Whitman has the transcripts of the Nuremberg meetings. So the question I want to ask is, why don't we, educated people in America, know this stuff? Why is it the case that when you turn on the television, there's Rachel Maddow, there's Van Jones, there are all these guys bloviating about fascism without the slightest clue about what fascism is, without any knowledge of the deep, intimate connections between American progressivism on the one hand and the actual real-life fascists on the other. And so here we are in the middle of what may be called a big lie, a big lie. It is widely believed by many people that the civil rights movement of the 1960s was effectuated, was passed by the Democratic Party. And some people believe with the resistance of the Republican Party. This is actually not true. In fact, it is the opposite of the truth. In fact, more Republicans proportionally voted for all the civil rights laws, by which I mean the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Fair Housing Bill of 1968, than Democrats. The opposition to civil rights came from the Democratic Party. And if the Congress had had no Republicans, only Democrats, none of these laws would have passed. Now, that is a fact. And again, it is a fact easily verifiable. We live in this wonderful age of technology where you don't have to take my word for it. You can look it up. But then the moment I say this on campus, people say to me, well, Dinesh, but don't you know there was a big switch? The parties swapped sides. The Republicans became Democrats. The Democrats became Republicans. I'm like, really? You mean like the cops became robbers, the robbers became cops? When did that actually occur? How would that even be possible? Did they actually exchange platform? So the argument here basically is that the racist Democrats, the infamous Dixiecrats, the people who, for example, broke with Strom Thurmond in 1948, who voted against the Civil Rights Act, these Dixiecrats, these racist Dixiecrats, became Republicans. Except they never did. except that this is itself a big lie, and it is the easiest lie to check. I simply made a list of all the Dixiecrats. In the Senate, there are about 35 of them. In the Congress, about 100 of them. You add in the governors, it's a group of about 200. 200 racist Dixiecrats. Let's count how many of them moved over to the Republican Party. Answer? One. One guy. Strom Thurmond. Nobody else. Everybody else remained in the Democratic Party and was lionized for it. When Robert Byrd, former Ku Klux Klansman, died in 2010, there was Obama at his funeral. There was Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton actually addressed the fact that Robert Byrd was in the Ku Klux Klan. He goes, let me tell you why Robert Byrd was in the Klan. You had to be in the Klan in those days in order to get ahead in the Democratic Party. Kind of an eye-opening statement. You had to be in the Klan. That was the only way to get ahead. Now, we have all these Antifa guys crawling out of their mom's basements, putting on their black outfits, looking for their missing bike locks, right? And going around knocking over monuments.
Correct. Okay.
Not African American. That's not a term I like.
How come you don't like the term African
Ridiculous.
American?
I was born and raised in America. I've never been to Africa. Why am I an African American? Most of my people have been here longer than most of the other people in this room. Yet most people don't have a hyphen. I'm an Italian American, Greek American, Romanian American. It's an absurd term. It's a term that Jesse Jackson almost single-handedly crammed down the throats of our media. And after Jackson began to talk about why blacks should have some connection to Africa, all of a sudden, New York Times, LA Times, all of the media began using that expression. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I personally don't use the term African American that much because one time I had a guest on the show and I referred to her as African American. She said, well, I'm actually Jamaican. So, you know what I mean? So I guess that goes to your point. So,
and I remember reading one time, Dave, somebody was given a description of some suspect who had done some crime, was running away, and he was described as an African American. How do you know where he was from? Could have been from Africa, could have been from Jamaica, could have been from Canada.
So what do you make of that when someone like, because I know you really rail against Jesse Jackson and these guys on the left that use, and I want to talk a lot about identity politics.
Okay.
So the guys that use these phrases, what are they going for there?
Well, what
is the goal there?
The goal is to tell black people that we're victims, that discrimination and racism remain major problems in America when in fact they don't. And they want black people to vote for the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party gets 95% of the black vote, and the reason they get it is because blacks are convinced that the #1 issue facing the country right now is social justice, racist white cops, discrimination, systemic racism, microaggression, whatever new word they come up with, and it's a bunch of nonsense. The #1 problem domestically facing this country is a breakdown of the family. And President Obama said it, I didn't. A black kid, or kid, not just a black kid, a kid raised without a dad is 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crimes, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. So you're far more likely to end up in jail without having a dad than you are because of a white racist cop.
Right. So, but you wouldn't not acknowledge that there are some systemic issues.
Give me an example. Tell me what you think the most systemic racist issue is. What is it?
Well, I would say that because black people in most cases, in many cases, were descendants of slaves, that racism as an institution, that it just, a certain amount of it just exists.
2015? Give me the most blatant racist example you can come up with right now.
I think you could probably find evidence that, in general, cops are more willing to shoot if the perpetrator is black than white.
What's your basis for saying that? Last year...
Well, look, I know a lot of people would say, look what's going on in Chicago.
I know what they would say. Yeah. I'm talking about what the facts are. 965 people were shot by cops last year and killed. 4% of them were white cops shooting unarmed blacks. In Chicago in 2011, 21 people were shot and killed by cops. In 2015, there were 7. In Chicago, which is a third black, a third white, and a third Hispanic, 70% of the homicides are black on black. About 40 per month, almost 500 per year last year in Chicago, and 75% of them are unsolved. Where is the Black Lives Matter on that? The idea that a racist white cop and shooting unarmed black people is a peril to black people is BS. It's complete and total BS. And the reason for these so-called activists saying this is the assumption that racism remains a major problem in America. The media, CNN, especially MSNBC, runs down whenever a black cop shoots somebody, and it's some march on Washington. It's ridiculous. Black people, half the homicides in this country are committed by and against black people. Last year there were 14,000 homicides. Not talking about suicides, I'm talking about homicides. Half of them were black, 96% of them black on black of that 7,000. Where's the Black Lives Matter people on that?
So there's where you would say that this is purely because of social justice. This is purely because they want ultimately for people to be angry enough to just keep voting Democrat.
That's right. And where's the evidence of a lack of social justice? When a black suspect is killed by a cop, believe me, the media's on it. People are watching it, and justice will, for the most part, occur. In Baltimore, where Freddie Gray was killed, Freddie Gray died in a van. I shouldn't say was killed. Died in a van.
Yeah.
You have a city that's 45% black. City council is 100% Democrat. The majority of city council is black. The top cop at the time was black. The number 2 cop was black. The majority of the command staff is black. The mayor is black. The AG is black. And yet here we are talking about racism. I mean, it's absurd.
Yeah.
It's absurd.
So it's funny, I find myself caught in between this a little bit as a liberal where I want to always try to defend the other. So in this case, the other being black people, I'm always sympathetic to that. And that, at the same time, I hear you laying out a pretty solid case.
These are just the facts. I'll tell you something else, too. There was just a study, University of Washington, and it turns out cops were more reluctant, more hesitant to pull the trigger against a black suspect than a white suspect, probably because of the fear of being accused of racially profiling and the fear that the civil rights establishment was going to come down on them. So if anything, whites are more likely to be shot by a cop under certain circumstances than a black person. And in the last 30 or 40 years, the percentage of suspects killed by cops who are black has declined 75%. However, the percentage of whites killed by cops has flatlined.
Yeah.
And so if anything, people are more concerned about shooting black people for fear that they're going to be called racist. And almost every one of these incidents, whether it's Eric Gardner in New York, who died because he was selling Lucy's and resisted arrest, whether it's Tamir Rice in Cleveland, who was twirling around the gun, whether it's Michael Brown in Ferguson, who had just committed a strong-arm robbery, almost every one of these incidents involved somebody resisting arrest.
Tell me, how do you get people to come around?
You're the one who made the assertion that you think racism remains a major problem in America. I asked you to give me an example. You gave me white cops going after blacks. As far as I'm concerned, you didn't hold it up very well. What's the other argument you have? What's the other thing?
Well, I don't know that it's systemic in the sort of macro sense.
I'm not mad. I just want to know what it is you're talking about.
That's exactly what. Believe me, that's 100% why I wanted to have you.
Blacks are not getting into school. BS. We have affirmative action. So a black person with an SAT and a GPA of X will get into a school faster and easier than a white person with an SAT or a GPA of X. And if going to school is a route to the middle class, you can make an argument that blacks have an easier route to the middle class. If you're talking about about poverty, the poorer you are, the more accessible loans and grants are for you. The problem, the biggest burden that black people have, in my opinion, again, is the percentage of blacks, 75% of them, that are raised without fathers. And that has every other social negative consequence connected to it. Crime, not being able to compete economically in the country, being more likely to be arrested, that's the #1 problem facing the black community. And when I hear people tell me about systemic racism or unconscious racism, I always say, give me an example, and almost nobody can do it.
So the family stuff. So I'll follow your logic there on the family stuff. What can actually be done about that then? I mean, because that's a big
reverse the welfare state. In 1890, 1900, you look at census reports. A black kid, believe it or not, was slightly more likely to be born to a nuclear intact family than a white kid. Even during slavery, a black kid was more likely to be born under a roof with his biological mother and biological father than today. What's happened is we launched this so-called war on poverty in the 60s, where literally Lyndon Johnson sent people knocking on doors. I lived in the 60s, and people knocked on doors apprising women of their availability to welfare, provided there was no man in the house. And we went from 25% of blacks being born outside of wedlock in '65 to 75% right now. And you look at how much money that we spent on welfare, and the lines are parallel. It was a neutron bomb dropped on this country, not just on the black community, but on people in general. At one time, only about 5% of whites were born outside of wedlock. Now 25% of whites are born outside of wedlock. I was in college in 1970, and there was a report called the Moynihan Report, The Negro Family, A Case for National Action. It was written by a liberal, by a man who became a Democratic senator from New York. And at the time, 25% of black kids were born outside of wedlock. He said, my God, this number is horrific. If we don't do something about it, it could get even higher. Well, fast forward, 25% of white kids are now born outside of wedlock. It is the #1 problem in this country, and what we've done, in my opinion, is we've economically incentivized women to marry the government, and we've allowed men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility. And now we have this.
My experience over the last 6 months has done a bunch of things in my life. One of them is it has put me in touch with quite a number of black conservatives, which I must tell you, it has changed my understanding of the world substantially, because I knew there were black conservatives, and I always thought, are they confused? Are they not understanding which side they should be on? And that is not what's going on. What is going on is that there is a dialogue, which I couldn't hear at least, which looks at the world. You can view the unfairness in the world two different ways. You can look at it and you can say, well, there's structural unfairness in the world, and the cards that we in this community are dealt are not fair. We're not getting our share of the good cards. Or you can look at the world from the point of view of personal responsibility, and you can say, well, it's kind of an academic question whether the cards you got were fair. You should play them as best you can, given what they are. The thing that I didn't get was one has almost no ability to address the question of how the cards are dealt. It's just not in the range of somebody, an individual who discovers that the cards are unfairly dealt can't do very much about that fact. But that individual can do a hell of a lot about their own position in the world by recognizing that actually you, especially if the cards are unfairly dealt, you need to play them very well. And that developing the skill to play them well has the ability to overcome at least some of the unfairness in how they're dealt. And so I have now listened in on this conversation. I've been invited into the conversation amongst some of these black conservatives. And this is what they are really saying, is that there is, from the point of view of where to put one's efforts, dealing on the personal responsibility side pays back better, which I don't think frees us in civilization from addressing the question of how the cards are dealt. I think we should be focused on it. But anyway, it more or less solved the mystery in a way that I thought was quite fascinating. And I'm heartened that they were willing to invite me into that conversation so I could hear it and finally figure out what was going on.
So they advocate towards discipline and personal responsibility as being core tenets that you should reinforce. Right,
and they are very sensitive to the issue of what happens when you focus on the unfairness of how the cards are dealt, which is that, what progressives typically miss is that it really does create a culture of dependency. If you focus on the fact that the cards are unfairly dealt and that's why you're facing a disadvantage, which is largely true, nonetheless, it demotivates you from pursuing success because you recognize that you're starting at a disadvantage and that you're unlikely to win the game. On the other hand, the game isn't what we think. If you can make progress and deliver your kids a head start relative to where you were, that's a win in the game. So anyway, I don't want to trivialize any part of this. I think the unfairness of the way the cards are dealt is really important, and we have obligations to address it. But from the point of view of individuals within a community trying to plot a course, being focused on the personal responsibility side makes a ton of sense.
So in Democrat tradition, Robert doesn't acknowledge the personhood of certain people. I guess in this case, he's angry about conservative blacks and their position on marriage. He tells his readers that we need to understand that this isn't a gay marriage issue, it's a human rights issue. Okay, first, virtually all of you liberals who try to say that this is a human rights issue are pro-abortion. You're a joke. Don't even talk to me about human rights when you would deny life, the first God-given right, to an innocent human being. Secondly, The other right you're overlooking is the church's right to free religious exercise. And to get the state to force the church into forfeiting their rights is an endorsement of tyranny. See, this is how rights work. You can't have your rights at the forced expense of another. You Democrats have yet to learn that. You wanted slavery and didn't care that it was at the forced expense of another person's liberty. So how did you get away with it? You disqualified their personhood and tried to establish them as merely property or animals, if you will. The same way you want abortion, and you don't care that it comes at the forced expense of a child's life. So how do you get away with it? You disqualify the child's personhood and try to establish the child as merely property. I would say as disposable as an animal, but you liberals care more about animals than you do innocent human beings. So while you liberals chant over and over again separation of church and state, you attack us conservatives for actually trying to separate the state from the church as you try to give the state more power to impose on the church. And in this case, you want your so-called rights at the forced expense of the church. The church has rights too, rights that you're wanting to infringe upon. And when these things are pointed out to you in a civilized manner, you liberals are the ones who become uncivil and start foaming at the mouth and call us animals along with several other nasty things.
Democratic Party historically has hated black people. Now, nowadays people will argue that the Democratic Party hates America and hates everybody, and I would concur with that argument, but when you look at history and you look at the people that are being used, abused, and tricked and conned into supporting the Democratic Party, I have to say the race that's getting the raw end of the deal is black people. And the reason I say that is because for years and years and years, people have told us that we should vote Democrat, that the Republicans are racist, that the Republicans don't care about black people, that the Republicans are somehow anti-African-American agenda, African-American expansion, prosperity. And it has all been a lie. It's unfortunate because a lot of us believe it blindly. You know, I consider myself a passive-aggressive Democrat. I voted for Barack Obama in his second term. If you would have asked me was I a Democrat or a Republican my whole life, I would have said a Democrat. And to be honest, until now, I don't even know why I would even say I was a Democrat. I didn't even know the difference between the Democrat and the Republican Party. If you would ask me what a conservative was, I wouldn't have known. This is the honest to God truth. And so the Democrats, in my honest opinion, based on my research, very impartial research, I believe that Democrats have historically hated black people. And I think they still hate black people today. Now, this is why I say this. It's not baseless and it's not me coming up with something to make you feel good. I'm just telling the truth, and if you disagree with me, you could literally go look this stuff up for yourself and fact check me. First and foremost, I'm gonna start with the Ku Klux Klan. I grew up believing that the Ku Klux Klan was probably Republicans because the Republicans are racist, right? The Ku Klux Klan definitely murdered, slaughtered, intimidated, and damaged the lives of so many black people. Who created the Democratic Party? Who founded the Democratic Party? I mean, not the Democratic Party, but the Ku Klux Klan. The Democratic Party. That was astonishing to me. I could not believe it. And then when you talk about the ideas and the pursuit of the Democratic Party, even way back then, they were the white supremacists. They were the ones that wanted white nationalists or white nationalism. They are the ones that did not want black people to vote. They literally promoted and voted in favor of anti-laws and legislation that will give black people the benefit to vote and become equal citizens and desegregate from schools. Not one person can deny that. Those are facts. You may not like them. You may be eating steak right now, and it's going to take a little bit to digest, but those are facts. Then you go to Bill Clinton, and you talk about the war on drugs. Now, I'm all for promoting laws and being a law-abiding citizen, but they created a war on drugs that affected black people and put more black people behind bars and separated them from their families like no other legislation, no other program ever in history. That to me is is a direct attack against African American people and the black community. Go look it up. Let's keep moving to more contemporary history. I mean, we can look at Barack Obama. What did he do for black people? Nothing. He did nothing. We can look at the rhetoric that's pushed about anti-police rhetoric that was promoted by Barack Obama. What did that do for the black community? Nothing. See, they're not trying to tell young brothers to follow the law. They're not trying to tell young brothers how to best behave themselves and put themselves at a proper position when dealing with law enforcement, which could avoid 95 to 98% of them getting killed. They don't tell you to sign up for the police department and monitor your own communities. They're not telling you that. They're telling you to resist, which then makes you more volatile towards police, which then causes more interactions or more negative interactions with police. The residual effect of what Barack Obama did in relation to police made matters worse. Not only for police, not only for black police officers, but for police officers in general. And what do you see happen when you ridicule and you demonize police? Well, they stop patrolling communities where they're going to get fired for just looking at somebody wrong. They're not going to get they're going to get fired if they make an illegal arrest and somebody just decides to resist arrest. So they quit patrolling in the communities. And what do? The crime rate spikes. What did Barack Obama do for Chicago? Nothing. I don't know any legislation. I don't know any cry. Nobody was sitting out there crying about the separation of young people from their families in Chicago. Whether they get murdered or sent to prison or they high on drugs, nobody's crying about their children being separated from them. Nobody's trying to tell drug dealers to get out of jail free or get out of jail early so they can be reunited with their family, committing felony crimes, just like people crossing the border. I don't hear them talking about that. They did nothing.
Saying this because black people have been brainwashed by liberals and Democrats for all these years. If you ever notice, and you can tell a black person this, why is it that every place in America that's very, very violent has two things in common? One single mother's, two Democrats.
Yeah, well, it's people, we were talking about that with Phil Advise. It goes back to Lyndon Johnson and a Model Cities program and basically creating an incentive for women to marry the state. I mean, he said he was going to have those Negroes voting Democrat for the next X amount of years. These are well-documented quotes. It wasn't because they cared about black people. It was just like now with illegal immigrants. The votes came cheap at that point. Create the division right now. Listen, there's nobody who's more shortchanged by the current Democratic Party proposals with illegal immigrants than people like my mom, legal immigrants who've come in, and by the way, this myth, I wrote about this, that immigrants are the backbone of America. No, America was. It doesn't matter where they came here to be American and be a part of America. The immigrant wasn't the label. It was you became American. So when you have people coming here illegally who have no interest in American values, who have no interest in taking part in the experiment that is America, well, guess what? Not only are they cutting ahead in line, but they're screwing up and destroying the America that all the legal immigrants sought.
You literally had to have watched me last night because we talked about this. We talked about how the Democrats are undercutting the voting populace. What they're saying is, well, shoot, we'd love to have those felons. So let's let the felons vote because they'll vote for us because we'll offer them something free. They're really just going to the lowest common denominator, and I hate saying it, but that's what they're doing. Yeah. They're going to people with their hands out and saying, well, we'll give you a little something if you give us your vote because it's the cheapest way around them getting a voting populace. And they've done that with the illegal immigrants when they were saying, well, we should get them worker cards and driver's license. So, and it's like they're making excuses for these people to stay un-American. So they get to fly their flag of where they're from, not learn your language, and all of the things that used to be a part of becoming American. Now, being a separatist in America is the norm.
They're polluting our kids on college campuses by teaching them about white privilege. So what they're polluting the minds of young people, both black and white young people, that somehow that if you have higher income, your kids go to better schools and they achieve more, that is some kind of privilege. I think that they should change it. They ought to get rid of the concept of white privilege and just call it achievement. Today, there's a 75% illegitimacy rate among black people. And so a lot of professors and leftists will say, oh, well, this is a legacy of slavery, to break down the black family. But in 1938, the illegitimacy rate among black people was 11%. In 1960, only 22% of black kids lived in single female-headed household. Today, over 70%. Then also, the poverty rate among blacks is 37%. However, blacks that can be characterized as married and working, the poverty rate is only 8%, and it's been that way for several decades. And the poverty rate among blacks who have two people working, mother and father working in the family, the poverty rate is 5%. And so you pick up the huge poverty rate in female-headed households, and that applies to whites as well. That is, female-headed white households are poorer than intact households. And so there are only 4 things that you have to do to avoid living in poverty, and it's not rocket science. That is, 1, graduate from high school. 2, don't have children before you get married. 3, take any kind of job. And 4, stay out of the criminal justice system. And if you do those things, you will not wind up poor.
In 1994, Bill Clinton wanted to pass a crime legislation, and it was 3 strikes bill. So if you have 3 felonies, you get a life sentence. Hillary Clinton was the first lady and aggressively lobbied for it. She gave a speech in '94 defending this piece of legislation. Now, she had many different defenses to it, and some of it were good parts of the bill, including community policing. And here in this clip, she's going to be talking about gangs, not just all kids, not just black kids. But when they talk about super predators, they almost always meant young African-American kids. And so here is Hillary Clinton talking about what should be done with them.
Not just gangs of kids anymore. They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy. We can talk about why they ended up that way, but first we have to bring them to heel.
Bring them to heel. Very rarely was the term super predator ever used in reference to white kids. Perhaps sometimes in reference to the Columbine kids, but almost always when talking about black kids in inner cities who are in gangs. So I'm giving you the full context. It wasn't just that she was talking about super predators, and it wasn't just regular old kids walking down the street. But was it racially used, that term? Yes, it most certainly was.
The U.S. puts more people behind bars than any other country. More than 10% of those in American prisons face life sentences. Some call life the new death sentence, where in some cases, golf club thieves get the same punishment as armed bank robbers. Much of this is due to laws made popular in the 90s.
And those who commit repeated violent crimes should be told, when you commit a third violent crime, you will be put away and put away for good. 3 strikes and you are out.
The murders of 2 young girls by criminals with long rap sheets led to this 3 strikes movement. Dozens of states and the federal government rushed laws on the books that trigger an automatic life sentence on a 3rd felony conviction. The laws were designed to keep violent repeat offenders off the streets, but in many cases, a person can get locked up for life for committing a non-violent, even laughable crime. For instance, in California, there are people in prison on their 3rd strike for stealing a pair of socks, taking change from a parked car, shoplifting a pair of work gloves, and even stealing a chocolate chip cookie from a restaurant.
Following through with that analogy would be, here's the Democrats with their restaurant. They got pizza, pie, ice cream. You can eat all you want because they make rich white people pay for it. Next door, you have the Republicans with their restaurant of steamed poultry and veggies. Sure, it's a much healthier diet, but definitely not as much fun to eat. Oh, and you have to pay for the food with the money you earned. Which restaurant do you think is going to have more people eating there? The irony is that the Democrats are the ones who are trying to control how people eat. Republicans are the ones who say, eat what you want. But it wouldn't be a bad idea to be conservative about what and how you eat, so as to prolong enjoyment of good health. That's what it is to conserve and be a conservative, so as to prolong enjoyment instead of being liberal with things that ultimately squander. Being made to feel like a victim for many blacks and being made to feel like you're a member of the 99% is comfort food for them. They've been conditioned to feel like it's important for them to identify themselves as the field Negroes and to hate the so-called house Negro. Meanwhile, the so-called house Negro that the race-baiting blacks call us is like, you do realize that slavery was abolished like 150 years ago, yet your mind is still in the fields, a place you've never been. Yet you want to stay brain chained to a place where Democrats wanted to keep you and still want to keep you. You think the Democrats have changed and that the Republicans aren't the party of Lincoln anymore. Democrats haven't changed. They still want you to be dependent on the master, and they're still dependent on you. It's just that now, instead of using blacks to farm cotton, they now use you to farm votes. And you've been suckered into believing that this off-balance circle of dependency is Democrats doing something for black folks. If Democrats do so much for you, why are you still so angry? Why are you still saying we shall overcome as if it hasn't already happened? I'll tell you why overcoming hasn't happened for you. Because you've been suckered into voting for the party that you were supposed to overcome. I'm still not understanding this butthurt logic of hating Republicans because they don't do nothing for black folks. If the Democrats are making life so wonderful for you, why do you need Republicans to do anything for you? The government isn't supposed to do things for you. You're so busy with this entitlement mindset of people doing something for you that you fail to see that the way out of poverty is by doing for others. It's called service. And the better you are at a service, the better you get paid. But you've been conditioned to see service as slavery, just the way the Democrats want it. The Democrats want you to believe that you're entitled to other people being deprived of their rights for your comfort. Democrats haven't changed because that's what slavery is all about, depriving someone else of their rights for the comfort of someone else. And Democrats have suckered you into thinking this is doing something for black folks, which in truth only makes life harder for everybody. Whereas the conservative Republican interpretation of the Constitution is that it's not the government's job to do for you. The government's job is to protect you. So if you want to start a business, the conservative official is the one who guards your business from the liberal official with how much they want to liberally tax and liberally regulate that business, which weakens the hiring power of that business, which makes it harder for you to find a job. But the Democrats will make you think they're doing something good for you because taxing them rich white folks, which is making them pay their fair share. And jobs, whatever. We Democrats are the ones who are really for the black man because we're going to make those rich white business owners pay more in unemployment benefits. Black people, you are voting for the party that fought to keep the slave market legal. You're voting for the party that authored Jim Crow. You're voting for the party that created the KKK. All the bigotry that has so deeply scarred America was the Democrats, and you vote for them.
And Turning Point USA Communications Director Candace Owens is in studio. So great to have you.
I'm so glad.
You actually are part of the story. Kanye first defended you.
That is absolutely right. Apparently, it was my brain that launched this ideological civil war in the black community, and I am so excited about it. This is a tremendous time to be alive as a black American. We've been existing under this facade, these lies the Democrats have orchestrated because they consider us a low information voter market, you know, and so they think we're not going to research the stats and we'll never find out.
I hate the race card. It's played every election year.
Absolutely.
Every single election year. It drives me nuts. You know, 14 states, Daryl, now have record low unemployment, record low. Black Americans, record low. Hispanic Americans, record low. Women in America, record low. Unemployment records. That is since Donald Trump was elected president of the United States. Is that good for America? Obama had 8 years, 13 million more Americans on food stamps, 8 million more Americans in poverty. That was his legacy. Who's doing a better job? Who's doing a better job?
Well, Sean, first of all, I don't know how President Trump could take responsibility for that progress. That still doesn't deal with the real issue. The real issue is that black Americans are still having great difficulty, and the unemployment for black Americans is twice that of whites.
Until every forgotten man and woman has a job and a trajectory to the life they want in this great free country. You're not answering my questions. Look at these numbers.
But now I have agree in some ways.
How did Obama fail with 13 million more Americans on food stamps? Did he fail? Did he fail with 8 million more in poverty 8 years later?
No, he did not fail at all. He did not fail at all. I think what he did was he made black America a focus. What I want to see, though, is President Trump to show us that black America is a priority for him and to have specifics as to how he plans to do that. There are issues of mental health,
he's
education,
skating around the issue,
healthcare.
and it's okay. I actually like when they do this, have these delusional responses. Just admit that the people, blacks are doing better under the Trump presidency. That's totally fine, but it's this refusal to admit it, and blacks are going to start doing the research, and they're going to start seeing what's going on.
I have been frustrated. Al Gore, Republicans don't even want to count you in the census, or, you know, the change in tone and cadence before predominantly black American audiences, I always felt was insulting. But the policies, you know, look at what Kanye said, 4,000 American souls slaughtered in Chicago. We once scrolled the names. We heard about Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman. We heard about Freddie Gray, Baltimore. We heard about Ferguson. I scrolled the names. We never heard of these 4,000 people shot and killed.
Well, listen, that's because Chicago is run by Democrats, and they never want to hold up a mirror to what they're doing, so that's why we never heard those names. 4,000, that's exactly right. That's the exact same number, about the same number of Americans that were slaughtered in the Iraq War. Right? It's a war zone. And Trump offered to send the National Guard, and the Democrats majorly opposed him. So what it comes down to is Trump is trying to be effective there, and we're seeing that we have so many great results in black America because of him.
What do you say to Daryl?
But Sean, let me say this, though. I think I want to hear from our president to tell us that something about black America is a priority for him tomorrow. I would love to hear him focus on mental health, education, health care. Those are issues that he can help us with tomorrow.
Yeah, Obamacare worked out great for everybody.
On those issues.
Well, look, it sounds like you're signing up for 8 years of Trump. That's what it really comes down to, because he's doing a great job, the numbers are better, and he needs more time in office to continue to do an amazing job. So it sounds like you're almost aboard the Trump train, which makes me feel happy. We're agreeing on something here.
Well, let me say something. I want to see Trump be successful because this is our country, but I don't think he is focusing on the issues that really affect black America. I hope he would, though.
So then you must agree that Obama was not focusing whatsoever on the issues that were affecting black America if you don't think that Trump is right now, because the numbers are in and blacks are doing better under his administration.
I love President Obama, and I don't think we should spend any more time trying to put him down.
I think it's important to show that things are a lot different, and it's important because for so long they have told us that because there was a black president, this meant progress. Progress is not a skin tone. Progress is a number, okay? And for so long we've been convinced, look, he's taking a photo op with Beyonce and Jay-Z. That means absolutely nothing. Chicago got worse while Obama was in office, and he came from there. That's what I mean, you can't dispute the facts here.
Is this a cultural shift? Is this going to have...
We are on the brink of a cultural shift, and I can tell you right now, it is going to be amazing to watch.